The year was 1738, and the settlement of Little Britain was alive with the chatter of its citizens, proud of their newly founded township, named in memory of their mother country. The township was a small but growing community, populated by families trying to build lives for themselves in this new land. The Kirksmills Historic District was bustling with the labor of skilled craftsmen, and the roads were filled with horse-drawn carriages and children at play. Among the townsfolk, a family of prominence had settled in a quaint home near the pine grove-covered bridge, a sight soon to be revered. The family consisted of Jonathan Campbell, his wife Mary, and their two children, Robert and Emily. Jonathan was a carpenter who had contributed to the construction of many buildings in the town, while Mary was known for her skill in herbal remedies. They were a well-respected family, living a peaceful life in a community they loved. However, even in those early days of settlement, there were whispers of something more lurking in the woods surrounding Little Britain. Strange noises were often heard at night, and some claimed to see shadows moving among the trees. These rumors were often dismissed as mere superstitions or the product of overactive imaginations. Yet, a lingering sense of unease hung in the air, a hint of something that defied rational explanation. The children in Little Britain would often share tales of ominous creatures, legends passed down by the native people of the land. Among these stories, the tale of the Skinwalkers was the most chilling. The Navajo described them as witches, corrupt beings capable of taking on the form of animals and even possessing the living. While many adults dismissed these tales as childish nonsense, there were a few in Little Britain who believed there might be some truth to them. As the seasons turned and the township grew, life continued as normal for the Campbell family. Jonathan's work was thriving, and Mary's knowledge of herbs and remedies made her a sought-after healer in the community. The children, Robert and Emily, were growing fast, nurtured by their loving parents and the wholesome environment of Little Britain. In the fall of 1739, a series of mysterious events began to unfold. Livestock started disappearing from nearby farms, and strange markings were found on the ground. Hunters would sometimes hear an eerie howl echoing through the woods, unlike any animal they knew. Even the most skeptical began to feel a chill down their spine as they considered the possibility that something unnatural was at play. A sense of dread began to permeate the town. People started to lock their doors at night and avoided venturing into the woods after dark. The legends of the Skinwalkers, once dismissed as mere folklore, were now spoken of in hushed tones. Fear was taking root in Little Britain. Jonathan Campbell, ever the rational man, sought to calm his community, urging them not to give in to fear and superstition. Yet, even he could not deny that something was amiss. The night seemed darker, the woods more foreboding, and a shadow seemed to hang over Little Britain. Winter settled in, and the mystery of the strange occurrences deepened. The disappearances continued, and now, even people were claiming to have seen figures lurking in the shadows. The whispers of Skinwalkers grew louder, and fear turned into terror. It was then that the Campbell family, too, found themselves touched by the inexplicable. Late one night, as the family was gathered around the fireplace, a noise from outside caught their attention. A low, mournful howl echoed through the winter air, unlike anything they had ever heard. They glanced at each other, fear in their eyes, knowing that something was out there, watching, waiting. Days turned into weeks, and the terror in Little Britain grew. The once bustling community became a place of fear and suspicion. People began to avoid each other, and the warmth of neighborly connection was replaced by a cold sense of isolation. As the year 1740 dawned, the town found itself in the grip of an unseen force, something dark and malevolent that defied understanding. The legends of the Skinwalkers were no longer just stories, they were a living nightmare. The Campbells, like many others in Little Britain, found themselves trapped in a horror that was all too real. What had begun as a dream of a new life had turned into a nightmare from which there was no waking. In the shadows of Little Britain, something was stirring, something ancient and evil. The Skinwalkers were real, and they had come to Little Britain. But what did they want? And who, or what, had summoned them? The answers were hidden in the darkness, waiting to be revealed. The story had only just begun, and the terror was far from over. The winter of 1740 in Little Britain was marked by a suffocating silence that hung in the air, a silence filled with dread and anticipation. The community, once lively and vibrant, was now crippled by fear. Families kept to themselves, drawing their curtains at night and whispering prayers for protection. Within the Campbell household, the feeling of terror was palpable. Mary Campbell found herself glancing over her shoulder, listening for sounds that shouldn't be there, sensing eyes on her that she couldn't see. Her husband, Jonathan, tried to remain a pillar of strength, but the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed his concern. Their children, Robert and Emily, were not oblivious to the change in the air. They sensed the anxiety in their parents, felt the chill in the air, heard the whispers of the townsfolk. Stories of the Skinwalkers had seeped into their minds, tales of evil witches who could become animals, stalk the night, and bring death and chaos. The town's elders convened meetings, seeking guidance from the few native people who were willing to speak of the legends. They learned of the Skinwalkers' association with death and bad omens, their ability to possess living creatures, and the way they represented a perversion of all that was good and sacred. Little Britain became a place haunted by shadows. Reports of strange sightings increased. A farmer claimed to have seen a coyote with human-like eyes. A hunter spoke of a creature that moved with an unnatural gait, eluding his shots and disappearing into the darkness. A child's nightmare of a twisted, half-human figure became a waking terror when she insisted it had been outside her window. The community was unraveling, and suspicion began to grow. Accusations were whispered, fingers were pointed, and the once tight-knit community began to fracture. The terror of the unknown was giving way to the terror of each other. Could one of them be a skinwalker? Was someone among them responsible for summoning these abominations? Among the most affected were the Campbells. Mary's skills in herbal remedies and her knowledge of ancient healing practices, once admired, were now viewed with suspicion. Whispers reached her ears that some in the town were questioning her practices, linking her to the very evil they all feared. Jonathan, too, found himself grappling with doubt. He began to question the safety of his family, wondering if their lives were in danger. He considered leaving Little Britain, starting anew elsewhere, but the thought of abandoning their home was painful. As spring approached, the mystery deepened. The strange occurrences continued, each one more terrifying than the last. Livestock were found mutilated, symbols were carved into trees, and chilling howls echoed through the night. The people of Little Britain were caught in a web of fear, trapped by something they could not understand or control. The Skinwalkers had become more than a legend, they were a living nightmare, a symbol of the darkness that lurked within and around them. Amidst the terror, a sense of impending doom began to build. Something was coming, something terrible and inevitable. The Skinwalkers were not merely stalking the town, they were leading it towards something, guiding it down a path of darkness and despair. As the days turned into weeks, the Campbells found themselves at the center of the storm. Accusations grew louder, and the family felt the weight of the town's fear and suspicion. They knew they were being watched, judged, and targeted. And as the terror grew, so did the realization that the Skinwalkers were not just random creatures of the night. They had a purpose, a plan, and the people of Little Britain were merely pawns in a game they could not comprehend. The true horror was only beginning, and the Campbells, along with the rest of Little Britain, were on a journey into the abyss. The Skinwalkers had come to Little Britain, but what they wanted was a mystery yet to be revealed. Certain gave way to summer, but the warmth of the season did nothing to dispel the icy chill that had settled over Little Britain. The once bustling town had turned into a ghostly shadow of its former self. Streets that were once filled with laughter and joy were now somber and deserted, as families remained shuttered within their homes, fearful of what lurked outside. The Skinwalkers' presence had become a haunting reality. Their twisted games were growing more bold and sophisticated. It was no longer about fleeting glimpses of creatures or the whispers of dark omens. Now, they were communicating, leaving messages, symbols, and cryptic signs that pointed to something deeper, something far more sinister. The community leaders were at a loss. They consulted with native experts, sought guidance from spiritual leaders, and even considered appealing to the crown for assistance. But answers remained elusive, and the terror continued to build. Within the Campbell household, the strain was taking its toll. Jonathan's once sturdy resolve had begun to crack, and Mary's sleep was haunted by nightmares, images of twisted forms, and shadowy figures that stalked her even in her dreams. Young Robert and Emily were not spared either. Emily, the more sensitive of the two, had stopped speaking, retreating into a world of silence and fear. Robert, attempting to be brave, took to patrolling the house at night, armed with nothing more than a wooden sword, hoping to protect his family from the unknown terror. A breakthrough came in the form of an old journal discovered by a local historian. It contained references to a dark cult that had once existed within the area, a group that had practiced forbidden rituals and sought communion with the twisted entities of the netherworld. The journal spoke of a prophecy, a dark covenant that would be fulfilled when the stars aligned in a particular pattern, a pattern that was due to occur that very summer. The Skinwalkers, it seemed, were not just random horrors, they were harbingers, heralds of something far greater and more terrifying. The symbols they left, the games they played, all pointed to a grand design, a cosmic plan that was slowly unfolding. Little Britain was a nexus, a focal point for forces that transcended human understanding. The town, its people, and the very land itself were part of a ritual, a dark ceremony that had been set in motion centuries ago. The Campbell family found themselves at the center of this dreadful web. Mary's ancestral connection to the ancient practices, her knowledge of herbs and healing, had somehow drawn the attention of the Skinwalkers. They were using her, manipulating her, guiding her actions in ways she could not comprehend. As the summer progressed, the terror escalated. The howls grew louder, the sightings more frequent, and the symbols more intricate. The people of Little Britain were being drawn into a dance of death, their lives manipulated by forces beyond their control. The Skinwalkers were no longer content to lurk in the shadows. They began to appear in dreams, invading the minds of the townsfolk, twisting their thoughts, and driving them to madness. A sense of doom pervaded the town, a feeling that time was running out. The alignment was approaching, and with it, the fulfillment of the prophecy. The Campbells, driven by desperation, began to research the ancient rituals, seeking a way to combat the Skinwalkers, to stop the ritual before it was too late. They knew they were playing with fire, delving into forbidden knowledge, but they had no choice. The darkness was closing in, and the monsters were no longer hiding. They were here, in Little Britain, and they were hungry. The countdown had begun, and the final act was approaching. The Skinwalkers had revealed themselves, but their true purpose, their ultimate goal, remained a mystery, a riddle wrapped in an enigma that threatened to consume the town and everyone in it. The world of Little Britain grew darker as summer's embrace turned towards the chilling grasp of autumn. Trees once lush with vibrant foliage began to shed their leaves, as if mourning the terrors that had befallen the township. Fields of crops withered, and the livestock grew frail. It was as though nature itself was recoiling from the looming malevolence. In the heart of the township, the Campbell family struggled with their newfound purpose. Armed with knowledge extracted from ancient tomes and guided by obscure symbols, they began to piece together the ritualistic puzzle that the Skinwalkers had laid out. Jonathan, his once steadfast resolve replaced by a grim determination, became the family's leader, taking charge of the dark task ahead. Mary, her motherly warmth suppressed by a calculating intellect, focused on deciphering the cryptic clues. The children, Robert and Emily, found roles within this eerie investigation as well, their innocence lost to the cruel reality of their situation. They were not alone in their struggle. Other families in Little Britain began to notice the growing horrors. Cattle mutilated, crops destroyed, eerie howls echoing through the night, and shadows that moved with malevolent intent. The town was under siege, and no one was safe. Rumors of witchcraft began to spread, whispers of ancient pacts and devilish creatures. Fear turned into suspicion, and suspicion into accusations. Neighbors turned against neighbors, friends against friends, as the terror sowed discord and mistrust. A meeting was called in the town's church, the only place that seemed untouched by the encroaching darkness. Here, the leaders of Little Britain, guided by the Campbell's research, shared what they had discovered about the Skinwalkers and the prophecy that was unfolding. Shock turned to disbelief, disbelief to acceptance, as the grim reality settled over the assembly. The Skinwalkers were not just legends, they were a tangible threat, a manifestation of an ancient evil that sought to fulfill a destiny written in the stars. The townsfolk, once proud and independent, now found themselves united by fear and a common purpose. A plan was formulated, a desperate attempt to stop the ritual, to disrupt the cosmic alignment, and to banish the Skinwalkers once and for all. An alliance was formed between the most knowledgeable and brave citizens, including the local native tribes who understood the dark lore of the Skinwalkers. Together, they began to prepare, forging weapons imbued with ancient magic, crafting talismans and amulets, and studying the forbidden rituals that had unleashed the horror upon Little Britain. As the days turned to weeks, the tension grew. The Skinwalkers became more brazen, their attacks more vicious, and their message more clear. They were watching, waiting, and taunting, a game of cat and mouse that had no rules and no mercy. The night of the prophecy was approaching, a night that would determine the fate of Little Britain and perhaps the world beyond. The stars were aligning, and the ritual was nearing completion. The stage was set for a final confrontation, a battle between light and shadow, good and evil, life and death. Little Britain, once a quiet and peaceful place, had become a battleground, a nexus for forces that defied understanding. The Skinwalkers had brought chaos, fear, and madness, but they had also united a community, forged bonds that transcended prejudice and hatred. In the face of unimaginable horror, the people of Little Britain found strength, courage, and hope. They were ready to face the monsters, to fight for their lives, their families, and their future. The time had come. The night of destiny was upon them, and the Skinwalkers were ready to reveal their final hand. The townsfolk gathered, weapons in hand, eyes filled with determination, hearts pounding with anticipation. The Skinwalkers were no longer shadows, they were real, and they were coming. The final night arrived, a night darkened by fear and uncertainty. The people of Little Britain had prepared as best they could, forsaking the use of magic, relying on their wit, courage, and determination. Yet, they were facing a terror that defied reason, a supernatural entity that seemed invincible. The Skinwalkers had played their game well, carefully weaving a web of chaos and despair. The townsfolk knew that they were facing a force beyond comprehension, yet they had no choice but to fight, to stand up for their land, their families, and their very souls. Jonathan Campbell led the makeshift militia, his face etched with grim resolve. Mary, Robert, and Emily were by his side, each one fully aware of the risk they were taking and the slim chance of victory. The night was eerily silent, the usual sounds of nature replaced by a stifling quiet that sent chills down spines. The wind howled through the barren trees, whispering warnings of doom. As the clock struck midnight, a howl tore through the silence, a signal that the time had come. Shadows danced on the edges of perception, shapes moved in the darkness, and the air grew heavy with the scent of dread. The Skinwalkers had arrived. A battle unlike any other unfolded. The Skinwalkers, cunning and relentless, attacked with ferocity and guile. They were not just monsters, they were intelligent, strategic, and utterly merciless. The townsfolk fought bravely, their weapons drawn, their bodies fueled by adrenaline. But they were outmatched, facing a terror that could not be defeated by mere force. The Skinwalkers struck from all sides, their movements unpredictable, their forms ever-changing. Coyotes, owls, wolves, they took on shapes that struck terror into the hearts of their victims, playing with their minds and feeding on their fear. One by one, the defenders fell, torn apart by claws and teeth, consumed by a darkness that knew no mercy. Screams echoed through the night, cries of agony and despair that would haunt Little Britain forever. Jonathan and his family fought to the end, a desperate struggle against an implacable foe. But even their courage and determination were not enough. The Skinwalkers were victorious. As dawn broke, a haunting silence settled over Little Britain. The battle was over, the terror had won, and the town lay in ruins, a testament to the horrors that had been unleashed. The Skinwalkers retreated into the shadows, their mission accomplished, their victory complete. They had proven their dominance, their power, and their invincibility. Little Britain would never be the same. The legend of the Skinwalkers had become a reality, a dark chapter in the history of humanity, a warning of the evil that lurks in the unseen corners of the world. The townsfolk who survived were forever changed, their innocence shattered, their trust broken. They knew that the Skinwalkers were real, that they were watching, waiting, and that they could strike again. The legacy of that dreadful night would live on, a tale of horror and defeat that would be passed down through generations. The Skinwalkers had won, and in their victory, they had shown the world the true nature of fear, chaos, and darkness. The mystery of Little Britain remained, a story that would never be fully understood, a wound that would never heal. The Skinwalkers had marked their territory, and their reign of terror had only just begun. As the years rolled on, something strange began to happen in the ruins of Little Britain. The town that had been devastated by the horrors of the Skinwalkers began to stir back to life. Buildings were repaired, roads were cleared, and fields were tilled once again. People returned to Little Britain, but these were not ordinary people. These were the very souls who had perished in that dreadful battle, the victims of the Skinwalkers' wrath. They walked with an odd gait, their skin loose and sagging, their eyes glowing with a sinister light, and their smiles twisted and wrong. The town became a living nightmare, a place where the dead walked and the living feared to tread. It was a trap, a lure for the unsuspecting traveler, a haven for the monsters that now called it home. Those who ventured too close to Little Britain were never seen again. The town became a place of legend, a ghost town in the truest sense, a place where the dead ruled, and the living dared not go. Stories spread far and wide, tales of horror and disbelief, whispers of a town lost to evil, a place where the monsters had won. Those who heard the stories shuddered and crossed themselves, thankful that they were safe from such terror. But the truth was far worse. Little Britain was no longer a town, it was a lair. The Skinwalkers had taken control, inhabiting the bodies of their victims, walking in their skin, living their lives. They had turned the town into a hunting ground, a place where they could feed and grow, where they could revel in their dark triumph. The town became a twisted reflection of what it once was, a place of death and deception, a maze of streets and alleys where the predators stalked their prey. The Skinwalkers played their roles well, mimicking the mannerisms of the people they had killed, pretending to be human, pretending to be alive. But their true nature was never far from the surface, and those who looked too closely saw the truth in their eyes, in their smiles, in the way they moved. Little Britain was lost, consumed by darkness, a place where the line between the living and the dead was blurred, where the monsters had taken over, and where the nightmare was only just beginning. Travelers were warned to stay away, to avoid the cursed town, to keep their distance from the place where evil had taken root. But still, some were drawn to Little Britain, curious, adventurous, or simply unaware of the horror that awaited them. And the Skinwalkers were always waiting, always watching, always hungry. The town became a symbol of terror, a place where the worst of humanity had been unleashed, where the monsters had won, and where fear reigned supreme. And still, the legend grew, a tale of horror and despair that would never be forgotten, a story that would become a part of the very fabric of the land, a warning of the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men, and the evil that could be unleashed when the monsters were allowed to win. Little Britain was no more. In its place stood a dark and twisted monument to chaos, fear, and the power of the Skinwalkers. A place where the dead walked, where the monsters ruled, and where the horror was never ending. The nightmare of Little Britain had become reality, a grim reminder of the terror that could be unleashed, and a warning to all who dared to venture too close to the darkness. In the shadow of the monstrous transformation of Little Britain, tales began to circulate amongst nearby towns and settlements. Though the whispers of the horror that had befallen the once thriving community reached many ears, there were still those who disregarded the warnings. Unwary travelers, desperate fugitives, curious thrill seekers, and even entire families seeking a new life would fall victim to the insidious trap that Little Britain had become. The victims varied, but the outcome was always the same. Below are some of the unfortunate souls who crossed the threshold of Little Britain, never to return. 1. The wandering merchant. A well-traveled merchant, known for his exotic wares, heard rumors of a thriving market in Little Britain. His curiosity piqued, he set off towards the town, ignoring the cautionary tales of fellow traders. As he entered Little Britain, he was greeted by seemingly friendly townsfolk, their smiles just a bit too wide, their eyes just a touch too eager. He was invited to a grand feast, his goods praised and his presence celebrated. As the night wore on, the merchant began to feel a growing unease. The laughter was too shrill, the toasts too fervent. When he tried to leave, he found the doors locked, and the once friendly faces turned malevolent. His screams were lost amidst the cheers of the monsters as they tore him apart. To the desperate family. A family fleeing poverty and seeking a fresh start stumbled upon the fateful road leading to Little Britain. They were welcomed with open arms, offered shelter, food, and work. The children played in the streets, laughter filling the air, the parents grateful for their newfound fortune. But slowly, the facade began to crack. The children's games turned violent, the neighbors' glances grew predatory, and the nights were filled with unsettling noises. The family's attempts to leave were thwarted, their every move watched, their every plea ignored. One by one, they were hunted down, captured, and consumed, their humanity replaced by the monstrous forms of the Skinwalkers. 3. The thrill-seeking adventurers. A group of young and daring adventurers, seeking the thrill of the unknown, decided to explore the legendary haunted town of Little Britain. Armed with swords, torches, and a misguided sense of invincibility, they embarked on what they thought would be an exciting expedition. They found the town eerily quiet, the buildings standing like silent sentinels, the streets empty and foreboding. As they delved deeper, they began to notice signs of life, shadows moving in the darkness, whispers in the wind. One by one, they were separated, drawn into hidden traps, lured by deceitful visions. Their screams echoed through the night as they were ambushed, overpowered, and slaughtered. Their courage and bravado were no match for the cunning and cruelty of the Skinwalkers. These stories and many others like them served as grim reminders of the evil that lurked within Little Britain. The town had become a place of death and despair, a hunting ground for the monsters, a tomb for the unwary. The horror of Little Britain was no longer a secret, no longer a myth. It was a living nightmare, a place where the worst fears were realized, and where the darkness of the human soul was given form and fury. And still, the Skinwalkers thrived, growing in number and power, their appetite for terror and destruction never satisfied. The town remained a death trap, a place where the unwary were lured and the unfortunate were lost, where the monsters ruled, and where the horror was endless. Point 4. The love-stricken couple. Two young lovers, seeking to escape the disapproving eyes of their families, found refuge in Little Britain. The promise of a new life, away from judgment and strife, seemed too alluring to resist. But the romance that blossomed between them soon withered under the shadow of the lurking horror. They were stalked, tormented, and manipulated by the monstrous inhabitants, their love tested and twisted until it became a weapon against them. The Skinwalkers used their affection to turn them against each other, leading them into a deadly trap where their love was their undoing. Their final embrace was one of terror and betrayal, their bodies left as a grotesque monument to the power of the monsters. 5. The lost child. A curious child, straying too far from home, wandered into Little Britain. The town seemed like a playground, filled with strange and intriguing sights. But the games quickly turned nightmarish, the child's innocence exploited by the Skinwalkers. They toyed with the young soul, leading him through a maze of horror, shaping his fears into living nightmares. The child's cries for help went unanswered, his tears unnoticed. He was trapped, alone and terrified, until the monsters finally tired of their game and ended his suffering. 6. The missionary. A devout missionary, determined to bring salvation to the people of Little Britain, entered the town with a Bible in hand and faith in his heart. He was met with mockery and scorn, his words twisted, his beliefs challenged. The Skinwalkers took pleasure in breaking him, using his faith against him, showing him visions of hell and damnation. He was driven to madness, his mind shattered by the relentless assault on his beliefs. In the end, he was left a broken husk, his faith replaced with terror, his soul consumed by the very evil he sought to vanquish. 7. The investigative journalist. A journalist, seeking the truth behind the legend of Little Britain, ventured into the town with a camera and a notebook. She was determined to uncover the secrets, to expose the horror, and to bring the story to the world. But the Skinwalkers had other plans. They manipulated her investigation, leading her into a web of deceit and danger. Every clue was a trap, every discovery a dead end. They played with her mind, warping her perception, feeding her lies. Her pursuit of truth became an obsession, driving her deeper into the darkness until she became a part of the horror she sought to reveal. These tales add to the growing legend of Little Britain, each one a testament to the insidious power of the Skinwalkers. The town's reputation as a place of evil grows, its name whispered with fear and awe. Yet, despite the warnings, despite the horror, people continue to be drawn to Little Britain. The allure of the unknown, the challenge of the forbidden, the thrill of the macabre, these are the siren calls that lure the unwary into the clutches of the monsters. The town remains a living nightmare, its streets filled with the echoes of screams, its buildings stained with the blood of the innocent, its very soul corrupted by the evil that thrives within. The Skinwalkers continue to rule, their reign of terror unchallenged, their hunger for chaos and death insatiable. The nightmare of Little Britain persists, the horror never ending, the fear ever growing, the darkness ever spreading. 1770s, a growing settlement. Little Britain grows as a hub for travelers and settlers, many unaware of the horrors lurking within. The Skinwalkers, having established a firm grip on the town, subtly guide its development. Businesses thrive, families settle, and yet, a sinister undertone pervades every aspect of life. Strange disappearances, unexplained tragedies, and eerie occurrences become woven into the fabric of the town's history. 1800s, the Industrial Age. The turn of the century brings industrialization to Little Britain. Factories spring up, attracting workers and their families, all blissfully ignorant of the dark secret that fuels the town's prosperity. The Skinwalkers adapt to the changing times, their malevolent influence reaching into the heart of the burgeoning industries. The number of victims grows, their lives consumed, their bodies mere vessels for the insidious creatures. 1860s, the Civil War. Little Britain's strategic location makes it a crossroad during the Civil War. Soldiers pass through, some never to leave. The Skinwalkers feast on the chaos and bloodshed, their power growing as they ensnare the lost and wounded, wearing their forms as macabre trophies. The town's haunted reputation spreads, becoming a place of fear even amongst the horrors of war. 1900s, modernization. With the dawn of the 20th century, Little Britain continues to thrive, modernizing and expanding. New roads, schools, and institutions are built, all under the watchful eyes of the hidden monsters. Those who delve too deep into the town's mysteries vanish without a trace, their stories lost, their fates sealed. The population swells, and with it, the ranks of the Skinwalkers. 1930s, the Great Depression. Economic hardship hits the nation, but Little Britain seems immune. The town becomes a haven for the desperate and destitute, but the promise of prosperity is a deadly mirage. The Skinwalkers grow bold, their appetite for terror and suffering insatiable. Families are torn apart, lives shattered, and hope extinguished. 1950s, post-war prosperity. The post-war boom revitalizes Little Britain, its dark past glossed over by the shine of progress. Suburbs expand, businesses flourish, and the town becomes a model of the American dream. But the dream is a nightmare, the prosperity a facade. Behind the smiling faces and picket fences, the Skinwalkers continue their grim harvest. 1980s, a modern mystery. As the world embraces technology and progress, Little Britain's sinister reputation becomes the stuff of legend, a dark tale whispered by those who dare to believe. Paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, and the curious are drawn to the town, their fates sealed by their curiosity. The Skinwalkers adapt, their methods evolving, their control unshaken. 2000, a town transformed. By the dawn of the new millennium, Little Britain is unrecognizable from its humble beginnings. A thriving community, a bustling economy, a picture of success, all built on a foundation of horror. The town is a living embodiment of the Skinwalkers, a place where evil wears the face of normality, where terror is hidden behind the mundane. The legacy of Little Britain is a testament to the relentless power of the Skinwalkers, their influence shaping the town's destiny across centuries. Their reign of terror is a hidden plague, a cancer that grows unchecked, a darkness that knows no bounds. And yet, as the years pass and the world changes, the truth of Little Britain remains buried, a secret known only to the damned. The Skinwalkers continue to thrive, their existence a mystery, their power unchallenged, their hunger never satisfied. The tale of Little Britain is a warning, a horror story that transcends time, a nightmare that lingers long after the final word. It is a tale of humanity's darkest fears, of evil's enduring strength, of a town forever cursed, forever lost. In the shadows of history, the monsters of Little Britain wait, their time endless, their reach infinite, their hunger eternal. The town remains a death trap, a place where the unwary are ensnared, where the curious are consumed, where the monsters walk among us, hidden in plain sight. The 2010s heralded an unexpected change in the dark tapestry of Little Britain. A ripple in the otherwise calm sea of malevolence disturbed the town's twisted balance. The reign of the Skinwalkers, unchallenged for centuries, was about to be questioned by the emergence of another cryptid, the enigmatic Mothman. 2010, an ominous warning. It was a night like any other in Little Britain. The town was asleep, its secrets buried deep beneath the veil of normalcy. But on the outskirts of town, near the shadowy woods that had witnessed centuries of horror, something stirred. A shape took form in the night sky, a silhouette that defied reason and understanding. Wings unfolded, eyes gleamed, and a presence settled over Little Britain. The Mothman had arrived. The Skinwalkers, for the first time in memory, felt a shiver of unease. Their connection to the town, their dominance over its people, was challenged by this new entity. The Mothman's presence was a harbinger, an omen of something they could not fathom. 2012, the first signs. In the months that followed, strange phenomena began to occur. Unexplained lights in the sky, ghostly apparitions, eerie sounds that echoed in the night. The townspeople, blissfully ignorant of the true nature of their home, were plagued by nightmares, anxiety, and a growing sense of dread. The Skinwalkers sensed a shift, a change in the very fabric of Little Britain. Their control wavered, their influence weakened. The Mothman, though unseen by most, was making its presence felt. 2015, a growing threat. As the years passed, the signs grew more pronounced. Accidents and tragedies, once the hidden handiwork of the Skinwalkers, now bore the mark of the Mothman. Its ominous shadow loomed over the town, a constant reminder of the impending disaster. The Skinwalkers, though still powerful, found themselves on the defensive. Their insidious hold on Little Britain was slipping, their reign of terror threatened by an unknown force. 2018, a town divided. Rumors spread, stories were whispered, and Little Britain became a town divided. Some spoke of the Mothman as a savior, a force of good sent to free them from an evil they could not comprehend. Others saw it as a new terror, a creature as dark and malevolent as the monsters they unknowingly lived amongst. The Skinwalkers, their once unbreakable control now fractured, struggled to adapt. Their victims, once so easily manipulated, began to resist. The town, once a haven for darkness, was now a battleground. 2019, the eve of disaster. As the decade drew to a close, the tension in Little Britain reached a boiling point. The Mothman's warnings grew more urgent, its presence more tangible. The town teetered on the edge of chaos, its people torn between fear and hope, ignorance and understanding. The Skinwalkers, their power waning, their supremacy challenged, prepared for a confrontation. The town they had ruled for centuries was slipping from their grasp, their reign threatened by a force they could not control. The stage was set, the players poised, and Little Britain awaited its fate. The clash of cryptids was at hand, the battle for a town's soul about to be waged. A new chapter was about to begin, a chapter that would redefine the horror, chaos, darkness, fear, and dread that had shaped Little Britain's history. The Mothman's arrival was a warning, a prelude to a disaster that loomed on the horizon. The Skinwalkers' reign was being challenged, their dominance questioned. In the shadows of the unknown, Little Britain stood on the brink of a new era, an era that promised to be as terrifying, as gripping, and as gut-wrenching as the centuries that had come before. The town was about to be reborn, its destiny reshaped, its horrors reimagined. The monsters of Little Britain were about to face their reckoning, and the world would never be the same. In the dark, forsaken heart of Little Britain, the Skinwalkers gathered. Their power weakened and their supremacy challenged. They sought answers in the ancient and forbidden arts they had mastered over centuries. A fire was kindled, not of ordinary flame but a blaze of dark magic and hidden knowledge, its glow imbued with an otherworldly hue. They circled the fire, their inhuman eyes reflecting the unnatural glow, their twisted forms concealed by shadows. One by one, they began to chant, a melody that was not of this world, a harmony that resonated with the evil that had long festered in Little Britain. The fire flickered and danced, its flames morphing and taking shape, a window into the unknown, a gateway to their fate. And there, in the heart of the fire, a vision emerged. The Duke of Lancaster County. A man, tall and enigmatic, his eyes glowing in the dark like twin orbs of night itself. He held a .44 Magnum, a weapon that emanated purpose and intent. His face was stern, his demeanor unyielding, a figure of relentless determination. The Skinwalkers watched, their breaths held, as the vision unfolded. They saw this man, the Duke of Lancaster County, facing the Mothman, the very creature that had threatened their reign. They saw him killing the cryptid, his gun echoing a promise of destruction and redemption. And then, the vision shifted, a glimpse into other worlds, other realities. They saw the Duke wandering a desolate wasteland, the numbers 717 etched on his back, a symbol of identity and destiny. His journey was one of solitude and survival, a path forged in devastation and despair. They saw him again, this time navigating through an undead apocalypse, his resolve unbroken, his mission unending. He was a beacon of hope in a world consumed by darkness, a warrior unafraid to face the horrors that lurked in the shadows. The fire waned, the visions faded, and the Skinwalkers were left with a sense of foreboding, a realization that their downfall might indeed be at hand. The Duke of Lancaster County was coming, a force that transcended time and space, a challenge they could not ignore, a destiny they could not escape. The night was filled with a heavy silence, the air thick with anticipation. Little Britain, once a playground for the monstrous Skinwalkers, was now a stage for a battle that would shape its future. The Duke was on his way, his path illuminated by the fire's warning, his destiny intertwined with the monsters he was meant to face. The town awaited his arrival, the Skinwalkers feared his approach, and the tale of Little Britain was about to enter a new and terrifying chapter. The Duke was coming, and the world of Little Britain would never be the same. The bus rattled along the winding roads leading to Little Britain, its passengers lost in thought or conversation. The hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the wheels created a trance-like ambience, a world momentarily disconnected from the horrors that lay ahead. In a window seat, the Duke of Lancaster County sat, his tall frame relaxed, yet his eyes alert, a subtle intensity hidden beneath his calm exterior. Beside him, a stranger, unaware of the Duke's identity, looked out at the passing landscape, lost in thought. The Duke turned to the stranger, his voice breaking the silence. "You ever heard of the Mothman?" he asked, his tone casual, yet probing. The stranger blinked, turning to face the Duke. "The Mothman? You mean the creature from the legends? The harbinger of doom?" He chuckled nervously, intrigued but also a little unsettled. "Yeah, I've heard of it. Why do you ask?" The Duke's eyes flickered, a spark of interest ignited. "I've seen it," he said simply, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. The stranger's laughter died abruptly, replaced by a look of incredulity. "You've seen it? Really? That's something." He shifted in his seat, a newfound curiosity in his eyes. "What was it like?" The Duke leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "It's a creature unlike any other. A warning, a sign. It's a part of something much bigger." He paused, letting his words sink in. "It's connected to this place, to Little Britain." The stranger's eyes widened. "Little Britain? I've heard stories about that place. Strange things happening, people disappearing." He looked out the window, a shadow of unease crossing his face. "What's going on there?" The Duke turned to look out the window as well, his eyes fixed on the approaching town, its outline just beginning to take shape in the distance. "There are things in this world that defy explanation, forces that are beyond our understanding." He looked back at the stranger, his eyes dark and serious. "Little Britain is a place where those forces are at play. It's a town that's been touched by something unnatural." The stranger swallowed hard, the excitement replaced by a growing sense of dread. "What do you mean? What's happening there?" The Duke's voice dropped to a whisper, his words measured and deliberate. "Monsters," he said softly, his eyes reflecting a truth that went beyond mere folklore. "Monsters that walk among us, hidden in plain sight. The stranger stared at the Duke, his face pale, his mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what he had just heard. The bus continued on its journey, drawing ever closer to Little Britain, a town that had become a nexus of horror and mystery. The Duke's words hung in the air, a chilling reminder that the world was not as it seemed, that there were forces at work that defied logic and reason. Little Britain awaited them, its secrets buried deep, its darkness ready to unfold. The Duke was ready. The stranger was not. And the tale of Little Britain was about to take another terrifying turn. As the bus continued its journey, the skies began to change. The soft blues and whites gave way to a blend of oranges and reds, as the sun lazily sank towards the horizon. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the road, and an unspoken tension began to build among the passengers. A few miles outside of Little Britain, the bus's engine coughed and sputtered, the vehicle jolting as though protesting the path it was on. The driver wrestled with the steering wheel, a look of concern etched on his face. "What's going on?" a passenger called out, the nervous energy in the bus growing palpable. "We're having some engine trouble," the driver replied, his voice strained. "I'll have to pull over and check it out." The bus rolled to a stop at the side of the road, the engine's groans fading into silence. The passengers looked at each other, unease in their eyes. The landscape around them was barren, and the town of Little Britain was still out of sight, a distant promise that suddenly felt much further away. The Duke remained calm, his eyes focused on the darkening horizon. He sensed something in the air, a foreboding that went beyond a simple mechanical failure. The driver stepped off the bus, toolbox in hand, and bent to examine the engine. Minutes turned into an hour, the sun dipping lower, casting an eerie glow across the land. "We might be here a while," the driver finally announced, wiping his brow. "I can't seem to find the problem. I'll need to call for a tow truck." Murmurs of discontent spread through the bus, the passengers restless and anxious. The stranger who had spoken to the Duke earlier looked particularly worried, his eyes darting to the windows as the shadows deepened. "We're stuck here?" he asked, his voice tinged with fear. "In the middle of nowhere." The Duke placed a reassuring hand on the stranger's shoulder. "We'll be fine," he said, his voice steady. "We'll wait for help, and everything will be all right." But even as he spoke, the Duke's mind was elsewhere, his senses tuned to something beyond the ordinary. The breakdown of the bus, the timing, the location, all of it felt too coincidental, too perfectly aligned with something darker. As night began to fall, the landscape transformed, the familiar giving way to the unknown. Shapes moved in the darkness, unseen but felt, a presence lurking at the edges of perception. The Duke knew they were not alone. The passengers settled in for a long wait, some trying to sleep, others engaging in hushed conversations. But the Duke remained vigilant, his eyes fixed on the night, knowing that Little Britain's secrets were reaching out to them, its monsters stirring, awakened by their proximity. The night was alive with whispers and unseen movements, the wind carrying the scent of something ancient and malevolent. The road to Little Britain had become a path into the unknown, and the journey was far from over. They were on the threshold of horror, and the door was slowly creaking open. As the minutes ticked away, the bus became a small island of artificial light in an ocean of encroaching darkness. The passengers were growing more restless, their conversations punctuated with nervous laughter and uneasy glances toward the windows. The Duke's senses were on high alert, his body tuned to every sound, every shift in the shadows. To the others, the shapes moving in the woods were nothing more than fleeting impressions, dark illusions playing tricks on tired eyes. But the Duke saw more. He knew what lurked in those shadows. He could see them with a clarity that went beyond normal human sight. Beings that moved with stealth and purpose, their forms shifting and melding with the night. Skinwalkers. His hand tightened on the handle of the .44 Magnum concealed beneath his coat, a cold comfort in the face of what was coming. But he remained silent, his face a mask of calm. Panic would only make things worse, and the Duke knew that control was essential. The stranger beside him seemed to sense something amiss. He kept glancing at the Duke, his eyes wide and questioning. "Do you hear that?" he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's like something's out there." The Duke turned to him, his gaze steady. "It's just the wind," he said quietly, though he knew it was a lie. "Don't let your imagination get the best of you." But the stranger wasn't convinced. He continued to stare out the window, his face pale, his breath coming in short, rapid gasps. The other passengers were becoming aware of the tension, their own fears rising, feeding off one another. The Duke's mind was racing, evaluating options, considering strategies. The Skinwalkers were closing in, drawn by some inexplicable force, some dark connection to the place they were headed. The bus was trapped, a beacon in the night, its passengers unwitting prey. And the Duke knew that the time for action was approaching. Every instinct told him that a confrontation was inevitable. He glanced at the driver, who was speaking into a phone, frustration in his voice as he tried to arrange a tow. The Duke knew they couldn't wait. The danger was growing with every passing minute. He stood, stretching his legs, his movements casual, his eyes still scanning the darkness. He needed to be ready, to be prepared for whatever was coming. The night was no longer just a backdrop to their journey. It was alive, filled with malice and hunger, a hunting ground for creatures that defied understanding. The road to Little Britain had become a nightmare, a descent into terror that was only beginning. The Duke's senses were tingled with anticipation, knowing that the shadows held more than just fear. They held a challenge, a battle to be fought. And he was ready. In the darkness, the Skinwalkers watched, their eyes glowing with menace, their hunger growing, drawn to the bus and the souls within. The night was theirs, and they were coming. A shrill scream pierced the night, echoing through the woods and sending a jolt of terror through everyone on the bus. The passengers' conversations abruptly ceased, and the driver's hand froze on the phone. The Duke's heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained impassive. "It's an animal," he said, his voice steady. "Just a fox or something. They make odd sounds sometimes." But even as he spoke, something heavy and wet slammed onto the hood of the bus with a sickening thud. The passengers screamed, and the driver dropped the phone, staring in horror at the gruesome object now splayed across the windshield. It was a human arm, torn and bloody, its fingers still twitching in a macabre dance of death. Chaos erupted inside the bus. People were shouting, crying, pushing against each other in a panic. The Duke moved quickly, trying to restore order, his voice raised but controlled. "Everyone stay calm. Stay in your seats." But it was too late for one woman. Driven mad by terror, she scrambled to the back of the bus, her face wild, her eyes wide with fear. "I have to get out. I have to get out," she shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "No. Wait," the Duke shouted, lunging toward her, but she was already out the back door, her feet pounding on the pavement as she disappeared into the darkness. "Get back in here," the driver yelled, but his words were lost in the night. The woman was gone, swallowed by the shadows and the terror that awaited her. The Duke's face was pale, his eyes dark with anger and frustration. He knew what had happened to her, what would happen to her, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He turned back to the passengers, his voice firm. "Listen to me. We have to stay together. We have to stay calm. We'll be safe if we stay on the bus." But his words were met with disbelief and fear. The people were trapped, their minds paralyzed by the horror of what they had seen, the knowledge that something unimaginable lurked just beyond their sight. And the Duke knew that the Skinwalkers were toying with them, reveling in their fear, drawing them closer to the edge of madness. Outside, the night was filled with the sound of rustling leaves and the distant cries of unseen creatures. The bus was no longer a refuge, it was a cage, and the passengers were prisoners, waiting for the predators to make their move. The Duke's hand went to his gun again, the cold metal a reminder that he was not helpless. He had faced the darkness before, faced the creatures that stalked the night. And he would face them again. But he knew that the battle had only just begun, that the true horror was yet to come. The night was long, and the shadows were deep. And the Skinwalkers were waiting. The Duke turned his attention to the driver, his mind focused on survival, on finding a way out of this nightmare. He scanned the map that was sprawled across the dashboard, his eyes quickly finding the route they were on, and then something else. "There's an old house," he said, his voice low and calm. "Just off the road, about a mile away. We can't make it to Little Britain, not with the bus in this condition. But we can make it to that house. Can you limp the bus there?" The driver looked at the map, his eyes following the Duke's finger, and then he shook his head. No, we can't make it to Little Britain. The extra weight from the passengers would break the rim in less than 5 miles, and we'd be stranded. We'd be sitting ducks out here on the main road. The Duke's eyes narrowed, and he looked down the road, his gaze settling on a turn that led onto a dirt trail. He traced it on the map, his finger coming to rest on the house. What about this trail? It leads to the house. Can the rim hold for a mile? The driver studied the map, his face pale, his hands trembling. He knew what was out there, what was waiting for them, and he knew that every decision they made could mean life or death. But he also knew that they had no choice. Yes, he finally said, his voice firm. The rim will hold for a mile. But that's it. We have to be careful. The Duke nodded, his face set with determination. Then that's what we'll do. We'll take the trail, and we'll make it to that house. It's our best chance. The passengers were silent, their eyes wide with fear, their faces drawn and pale. They knew that they were trapped, that their fate was in the hands of two men they barely knew. But they also knew that they had no other choice. The night was closing in, and the shadows were growing deeper. The Skinwalkers were out there, watching, waiting, hungry for their prey. And the Duke knew that they had to move quickly, that they had to be smart and decisive, that they had to stay one step ahead of the creatures that hunted them. Because the night was far from over, and the true terror was yet to come. The bus rumbled to life, its engine coughing and sputtering as it made its way onto the dirt trail. The passengers huddled together, their eyes darting from window to window, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The bus lurched forward, the damaged rim protesting with every jolt and bump of the dirt trail. A thick tension hung in the air, and the passengers' faces were etched with fear and anticipation. The driver's hands clung to the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he guided the wounded vehicle down the narrow path. The Duke's eyes were fixed on the trail ahead, his senses heightened, attuned to every sound and movement. The haunting silence of the night was broken only by the rumble of the bus and the distant call of unseen creatures. And then, a scream. It was a sound that sent chills down everyone's spine, a desperate, pleading cry that was unmistakably human. The Duke's head snapped to the side, and he saw her. The woman who had run from the bus earlier was stumbling out of the woods, her clothes torn, her face twisted with terror. She was screaming for help, her voice hoarse and broken, her eyes wild with fear. "Stop the bus," the Duke shouted, his voice cutting through the panic that was spreading through the passengers. The driver slammed on the brakes, and the bus skidded to a halt, its passengers thrown forward by the sudden stop. "We can't just leave her out there," someone yelled. "She could be one of them," another voice countered, filled with suspicion and dread. The Duke was already on his feet, his .44 Magnum in hand. "I'll get her," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "Stay on the bus. Keep the doors closed." He made his way to the door, his eyes never leaving the woman, who was now sobbing uncontrollably, her body racked with sobs. "Please," she cried. "Please, help me." The Duke stepped off the bus, his gun raised, his senses alert. He knew that this could be a trap, that the Skinwalkers were cunning and deceitful. But he also knew that he couldn't just leave her out there, that he had to take the chance. He approached her slowly, his eyes scanning the woods, his ears straining for any sound that might betray the presence of the creatures that hunted them. The woman was on her knees now, her body shaking, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, don't leave me." "I won't," the Duke said, his voice gentle but firm. "But you have to come with me. Now." He reached out to her, his hand steady, his eyes locked on hers. And for a moment, everything was still, the world holding its breath as they stood on the edge of darkness, the shadows closing in, the night waiting to consume them. The bus resumed its agonizing journey down the trail, the woman now safely inside, her breath ragged and her body still trembling. The passengers listened in horrified silence as she began to tell her tale, her voice a thin whisper that sent shivers down their spines. "I ran," she said, her eyes wide and unseeing, as if reliving the nightmare. "I ran as fast as I could, but they were everywhere. The shadows, the sounds, the smell. They were hunting me, following me, getting closer and closer. I fell, and they were upon me, tearing, biting, pulling at my flesh. Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The Duke stood at the back of the bus, his eyes fixed on her, his mind processing every detail. There was something wrong, something off about her appearance. Her skin was loose, sagging in places, her features bony and sharp. He could see the telltale signs, the subtle hints that something was amiss. But he said nothing, keeping his suspicions to himself, knowing that to voice them would only cause panic and chaos. He watched her closely, his hand resting on the butt of his gun, ready to act if necessary. The bus continued to limp along the trail, the house now in sight, a dark and foreboding presence that loomed in the distance. The passengers were silent, the woman's story still echoing in their minds, the terror of the night closing in around them. They wear the skin of their victims, the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes hollow and haunted. They take their form, their memories, their lives. They become them, and then they hunt again, always hungry, always searching for more. The bus pulled up to the house, its engine sputtering and dying, the journey finally at an end. The passengers looked at the dark windows, the closed doors, the silence that hung in the air. They were safe, for now. But the Duke knew that the night was far from over, that the danger was still very real. He knew that the Skinwalkers were still out there, watching, waiting. And he knew that they were not alone. He looked at the woman again, his eyes narrowing, his instincts screaming at him. But he said nothing. For now, they were safe. For now, they were together. The Duke's voice cut through the stillness, calm and authoritative, directing the driver's actions with a clear purpose. Line up the bus door with the front door of the house. We can use the bus to block it off. That door opens inward, and I can't see any hinges. It'll provide a barrier. The driver, still shaken but responding to the Duke's confidence, maneuvered the bus with precision. The passengers could feel the strain on the vehicle, hear the groaning of metal, and sense that it was on its last legs. The alignment was almost perfect, the bus door facing the entrance of the ominous house, forming a makeshift barrier. They were just settling into position when there was a loud, sharp crack, followed by a metallic screech. The rim and axle broke, the bus lurching violently to one side. The passengers cried out in alarm, gripping their seats, eyes wide with fear. But the Duke remained calm, his eyes assessing the situation, his mind already working on the next move. It's in place, he announced, his voice steady, his gaze sweeping the interior of the bus. We did it. The bus door and the house door align perfectly. They're blocked. We've got a barrier. He looked at the driver, his eyes serious but reassuring. Well done. You got us here. The driver nodded, his shoulders sagging with relief, the tension in the air slowly beginning to dissipate. The woman, the one they'd picked up along the trail, was still sitting quietly, her eyes vacant, her skin still loose and ill-fitting. The Duke watched her, his suspicions growing, his instincts telling him that something was not right. But for now, they were safe. For now, they had a barrier, a line of defense against the horrors of the night. The house loomed before them, dark and silent, a sanctuary and a mystery, a place of refuge and perhaps of danger. The Duke knew that they had won a small victory, but the night was far from over. They were trapped, surrounded, the unknown closing in around them. But they were together, united by fear and by the need to survive. And the Duke was ready, his mind sharp, his eyes clear, his .44 Magnum at his side. The battle had only just begun, and he was prepared to fight, to face the darkness, to confront the terror that lurked in the shadows. For he knew that the Skinwalkers were still out there, watching, waiting, hungry for more. And he knew that the night was filled with monsters, and that the real horror had yet to reveal itself. He looked at the house, at the bus, at the faces of the people around him. And he knew that they were not alone. He knew that the night was alive, and that the battle had only just begun. The Duke's voice rang out clear and commanding as he ordered the driver to secure the house. Make sure the back door's blocked off. Check the windows. We don't want any surprises. I'm going to tend to her wounds. He gestured at the woman, his eyes betraying no hint of his suspicions. The driver nodded, rallying the passengers into action. They began to barricade doors, board up windows, and make the house as secure as possible, their actions fueled by the fear of what awaited them outside. Meanwhile, the Duke guided the woman into the bathroom, his face a mask of concern, his mind sharp and focused. Once inside, he locked the door and turned to face her, his eyes cold and piercing, his hand reaching for his .44 Magnum. "What happened to you out there?" he demanded, his voice no longer gentle. "Tell me the truth." She tried to lie, her voice trembling, her eyes darting nervously. But the Duke was not fooled, his instincts screaming that she was not what she seemed. "You're one of them, aren't you?" he accused, his voice low and deadly. "A skinwalker." She denied it, her voice breaking, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. But the Duke was relentless, his mind working, his questions probing, his eyes never leaving hers. Finally, she broke, her body convulsing, her skin beginning to loosen and shift, her true form emerging as she shed her human disguise. "We know who you are, Johnny Vanduke," she hissed, her voice now guttural and filled with menace. "From Vault 717 to the undead world, we know about all of you. We saw you kill the Mothman. But you foolishly thought you could kill an interdimensional being? No, he just left Lancaster alone, and he warned us, Vanduke. We will kill you before you can kill us." With that, she lunged at him, her eyes filled with malice, her mouth gaping, her teeth sharp and dripping. The Duke's reflexes were lightning fast, his hand steady, his aim true. He pulled the trigger, and the bullet found its mark, the skinwalker's body collapsing to the floor, her life extinguished in an instant. The Duke stood over her, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mind reeling from the revelation. They knew him. They were watching him. They were waiting for him. He felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of foreboding settling over him. He knew that the battle was far from over. He knew that the night was filled with danger, and that the skinwalkers were still out there, ready to strike. But he also knew that he was ready, his resolve strengthened, his determination unwavering. He was Johnny Vanduke, the Duke of Lancaster County, and he was not afraid. He would face them. He would fight them. He would win. He looked at the woman's lifeless body, at the skinwalker's true form, twisted and grotesque, a monster wearing the mask of humanity. And he knew that the real horror was only just beginning. He reloaded his .44 Magnum, his mind clear, his eyes focused. He was ready for whatever awaited him. The sound of gunshots reverberated through the old house, piercing the silence and sending a shockwave of fear through everyone inside. The passengers stopped what they were doing, their eyes wide, their hearts pounding. The driver looked towards the bathroom door, uncertainty and dread in his eyes. The Duke emerged, his face set, his eyes hard. He looked at the faces turned towards him, the fear and the questions in their eyes. He knew what they wanted to know, what they needed to hear. "They were right," he said, his voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil he felt inside. "We shouldn't have let her on the bus." He saw the realization dawn in their eyes, the understanding of what he meant, of what he had done. He saw the fear deepen, the horror of what they were facing becoming all too real. He said nothing of what he had learned, nothing of the skinwalker's words, nothing of the warning, nothing of the threat. He knew that they were not ready, that they could not handle the truth. He knew that he had to carry that burden alone, that he had to face the night and the monsters that awaited them with clear eyes and a steady hand. He looked at the driver, his gaze unwavering. "We need to stay alert," he said, his voice firm. "We need to be ready. They're out there, and they're coming for us." The driver nodded, his face pale, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll be ready," he said, his voice strong. "We'll fight them. We'll survive." The Duke's eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of compassion in their depths. "We'll do more than survive," he said, his voice gentle. "We'll win." He turned away, moving to the window, looking out into the darkness, knowing that the night was far from over, knowing that the battle had only just begun. The house's silence was shattered once again, this time by a scream of pure terror. The Duke's head snapped around, his eyes finding the source of the sound. One of the passengers, a young man who had been nervously peering through a crack in the barricaded window, was suddenly pulled violently against it. A large, gnarled hand had burst through the wooden planks and glass, grasping the young man's shoulder with an iron grip. Its fingers were bony, the nails long and sharp, the skin pallid and loose, a clear sign of the skinwalker that wielded it. The passenger's eyes were wide with horror, his mouth open in a silent scream as he struggled against the powerful grip, his feet slipping on the floor as he tried in vain to pull away. The Duke moved instantly, his body reacting even before his mind fully processed what was happening. He lunged forward, his .44 Magnum already in his hand, his aim steady and true. "Get back," he yelled at the others, his voice filled with urgency. The young man's face was contorted with fear and pain, his body being pulled inexorably toward the broken window, toward the monster that awaited him outside. The Duke's finger tightened on the trigger, his aim unwavering. He knew that he had to act fast, that he had to be precise, that he had to save the young man from a fate worse than death. The gunshot was loud, deafening in the confined space, but the Duke's focus never wavered. He watched as the bullet found its mark, tearing through the skinwalker's hand and forcing it to release its grip. The young man fell back, collapsing to the floor, his body trembling, his face pale and sweaty, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The hand retreated, disappearing back through the broken window, leaving behind a trail of dark blood and a room filled with shock and fear. The Duke stood over the young man, his gun still aimed at the window, his body tense, ready for whatever came next. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now." The young man looked up at him, his eyes filled with gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice shaky. The Duke nodded, his gaze never leaving the window, his senses on high alert. "We need to move," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to reinforce the windows, secure the doors. They're getting bolder, more aggressive. They won't stop until they get what they want." The tension in the room was palpable as the Duke, the driver, and the stranger huddled over the map, desperately searching for options. The others looked on, fear and anxiety etched on their faces. The constant harassment by the skinwalkers, the bumps, the cracks, the shadows outside the windows, had worn everyone's nerves thin. "We're trapped here," the driver said, frustration evident in his voice. "There's no way we can walk to any of these places, not with those things out there. And even if we could, the cops are probably in on this," the stranger added, his eyes dark with suspicion. "Judging by how this area is well traveled, this would have been out by now in the news. The farm is useless, and the gas station is too far," the Duke said, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "We could signal them from the roof, but—" "Get real," another passenger interjected, his voice filled with scorn. "Nobody here knows signal lamps." An elderly passenger, his face lined with age and experience, spoke up, his voice loud and firm. "Well, I was in the Navy, and I'm a little rusty, but I'm sure I could." The room fell silent, all eyes on the old man. The Duke looked at him, his eyes assessing, considering the possibility. "We could shoot a line to the cell tower," the stranger suggested, his eyes on the Duke's gun. "I'm sure that gun of yours could carry a rope shot far enough." "We don't even have rope," another passenger yelled, his voice filled with desperation. "And don't forget the bus is useless." The room erupted into chaos, voices raised, accusations hurled, fear and frustration spilling over. "Enough," the Duke yelled, his voice cutting through the noise. "We need to stay calm. We need to think clearly. We need to work together." He looked around the room, his gaze meeting each pair of eyes, his presence commanding, his words soothing. "We have limited options, but we're not out of them yet," he continued, his voice filled with conviction. "We can make a plan. We can find a way out of this. But we need to be smart. We need to be careful. And we need to be united." The room fell silent, the tension still there but now tempered by a newfound determination. The Duke looked at the map again, his mind working, his instincts guiding him. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "We'll find a way. We'll survive this night." And in that moment, despite the terror that lurked outside, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, there was a spark of hope, a glimmer of belief. The conversation was once again hushed as the stranger beckoned the Navy veteran over. "Come here," "Quick," he said, urgency in his voice. A woman stood up, her eyes determined, her posture confident. "I'm a police officer from Millersville," she announced, her voice carrying authority. "You could say I have experience fighting these kinds of things. I took out a few dogmen in my time." She dropped her bag on the table, revealing a cache of police gear. "I was supposed to investigate people going missing around here," she continued, her eyes fixed on the Duke. "But I guess now we need this to get out of here." They all gathered around the bag, eyes widening as they found a powerful flashlight, 300 rounds of 9mm ammo, 3 Glocks, and 2 police batons. There were murmurs of relief, glances exchanged, hope building. "All right," the Duke said, taking charge. "We need a plan. We've got a way to signal for help, we've got weapons, and we've got each other." They passed out the batons to the others, arming them, giving them a sense of control, a semblance of power. "We'll get onto the roof," the policewoman said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll signal the gas station, and possibly the farm, even though we think it's useless. We'll need to guard the Navy vet while he signals," the Duke added, his eyes on the elderly man. "We'll have to be on our guard, be ready for anything." The room was filled with nods, faces set, resolve strengthened. "We'll do this," the stranger said, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll make it through this night." The next hour was filled with preparation, with planning, with anticipation. They fortified the house, checked the weapons, went over the plan again and again. And then it was time. They made their way to the roof, the Duke and the policewoman guarding the Navy vet as he began to signal, his hands skilled, his eyes focused. The flashlight flashed, the signal sent hope and fear mingling in the cold night air. But there was no response. They tried again, and again, the minutes stretching, the night deepening, the shadows growing. And still, there was no response. Frustration grew, doubt crept in, fear began to knock. But they didn't give up. They kept trying, kept hoping, kept believing. The Duke's eyes were watchful, his senses alert, his instincts guiding him. He knew they were not alone. He knew they were being watched. But he also knew they were strong, they were capable, they were united. And they would not give up. They would keep signaling, keep trying, keep fighting. They would survive this night. They had to. A sudden, sharp whooshing sound cut through the silence, followed by a loud clang as the flashlight was knocked out of the Navy vet's hands by a spear. The sudden darkness was pierced by the chilling sight of dozens of glowing eyes, all fixated on them, lurking in the shadows of the night. "It's time to retreat," the Duke yelled, his voice filled with urgency. The policewoman grabbed the Navy vet, pulling him away from the edge as the Duke provided cover fire, the sound of the .44 Magnum echoing through the night. They made a frantic dash for the entrance to the house, the haunting glow of the eyes following them, the menacing whispers of the skinwalkers growing louder. The stranger was waiting at the door, his face pale, his eyes wide. "Hurry," he yelled, his voice filled with panic. They stumbled inside, the Duke slamming the door shut, his eyes wild, his breath ragged. The sound of the skinwalkers grew louder, their presence more palpable, their intent more malevolent. "They're coming," the policewoman said, her voice filled with dread. "We have to hold them off," the Duke replied, his voice filled with determination. "We can't let them in." They barricaded the doors, fortified the windows, prepared for the onslaught. The house became a fortress, a sanctuary, a last stand. The night wore on, the tension building, the fear growing. The skinwalkers were relentless, their attacks ferocious, their determination unwavering. But so were the people inside the house. They fought back, they resisted, they endured. The Duke's eyes were hard, his resolve unbreakable. He knew what they were up against, he knew what was at stake. And he knew they could not fail. They would hold the line, they would stand their ground, they would survive the night. The battle raged on, the house a beacon of defiance, a symbol of hope, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. And as the night wore on, the Duke's mind began to wander, to think of the other versions of him, the other worlds he had seen, the other battles he had fought. He knew this was just one battle in a never-ending war, one fight in a multiverse of chaos. The howls and screeches of the skinwalkers seemed to subside, retreating back into the dark, dense woods. The night turned eerily silent, the tension still thick in the air, the fear still palpable. But inside the house, a temporary relief washed over the faces of those who had survived the onslaught. The Duke, still vigilant, his eyes narrowed, surveyed the surroundings, trying to make sense of the sudden withdrawal of the skinwalkers. "Maybe they're regrouping," the policewoman said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Or planning something else," the Duke replied, his voice grim. But they didn't see what was happening just outside their makeshift fortress. The bus that had served as their barricade was now under siege. Several skinwalkers, cunning and relentless, were tearing it apart, their claws and teeth gnashing through metal and glass. They were working silently, methodically, their intent clear, their strategy brilliant. They were not just attacking, they were infiltrating, finding a way inside, breaking down the defenses. The Duke's instincts were tingling, something in the back of his mind nagging at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was not over, that something more sinister was at play. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness, his eyes straining to see through the night. But the bus was hidden from view, the skinwalkers' plan concealed, their approach undetected. "We need to stay alert," he said finally, his voice filled with a foreboding sense of dread. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." The others nodded, their faces grim, their resolve hardened. They knew they were in for a long night, a night filled with terror and uncertainty, a night where survival was not guaranteed. They would have to be ready for anything, prepared for everything, willing to fight to the bitter end. For the skinwalkers were not done, their hunger not sated, their wrath not quenched. Panic erupts inside the house as the front window shatters, a small crack that exposes the horror just outside. The passengers and defenders of the house strain their eyes to make sense of what they're seeing, and then it hits them. The bus, once their protective barrier, now crawls with nightmarish figures. Skinwalkers, their twisted and deformed bodies moving with sinister grace, fill the interior of the vehicle, their glowing eyes fixed on the house. The barricade had been breached, and the creatures were now practically at their doorstep. "It's a trap. They've outsmarted us," the driver screams, his voice cracking with terror. "They're in the bus," a woman shrieks, her face white with fear. The Duke remains calm, his mind racing, analyzing the situation. He sees the tactical brilliance of the creatures, the way they've used their intelligence and cunning to turn the tables. "They want us to panic," he says quietly, his voice steady. "They want us to make a mistake." He turns to the police officer from Millersville, her face set, her eyes determined. "We need to fortify this place. We need to prepare for an assault." The others look at him, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and resolve. They know he's right. They know that the time for running is over, that the time for fighting has come. "We hold our ground," the Duke continues, his voice filled with authority. "We fight with everything we've got. We do not give in to fear. We do not give them what they want." The debate among the terrified passengers and the Duke grows heated and desperate. They know they're trapped, with the skinwalkers closing in, and their options are narrowing by the minute. Some plead to make a break for the police station, while others argue that the cell tower might still be their best chance for contacting help. Others yet insist that the farm could offer some shelter, a temporary respite. Arguments flare, voices rise, and the Duke tries to keep a semblance of order as they pore over the map once more, the cold, analytical part of his brain searching for a solution, an escape route, anything that might give them a chance. And then, in the midst of the chaos, an old, frail voice cuts through the noise, capturing everyone's attention. The elderly woman stands up, her body trembling, her eyes filled with a wisdom and determination that belies her age. She holds up a faded, yellowed piece of paper, her voice quivering with conviction. "I've been paying attention to the build of this house and looked around. I found this in one of the cabinets. It's a design plan for the house. My grandma used to tell me how certain houses up north would contain tunnels for the Underground Railroad back during the Civil War. My eyesight is bad, though, so if someone can read this, we might have a way out." A hush falls over the room as the realization sinks in. The Duke takes the paper from her hands, his eyes widening as he scans the design, his mind racing as he sees the potential, the hope, the lifeline that they've been handed. "You may have just saved us all," he says, his voice filled with awe and gratitude. The police officer from Millersville takes a closer look, her trained eye quickly discerning the layout, the hidden passages, the escape route. "There's a tunnel," she says, her voice filled with excitement and hope. "It leads to a hidden exit, about a quarter mile from here, close to the farm." The room erupts in cheers and tears of relief, the weight of despair lifting as they realize that they have a chance, a way to escape the nightmare. But the Duke knows that it's not over yet. The Skinwalkers are still out there, still waiting, still hungry. "We need to move quickly," he says, his voice firm. "We need to be careful, quiet, and fast. We have a way out, but we're not safe yet." They gather their belongings, their weapons, their courage, and they prepare to face the dark, to descend into the unknown, to escape the terror that awaits them above. With the discovery of the hidden tunnel, the group moves quickly, their every movement filled with urgency and purpose. The Duke leads the way, the police officer from Millersville close behind, their senses honed, their minds alert. The others follow, trust and hope fueling their steps. The entrance to the tunnel is concealed behind an old bookshelf, a testament to the ingenuity and bravery of those who had used it in the past. With a heave, they move the bookshelf aside, revealing the dark maw of the tunnel, a path to salvation hidden in shadows. "We don't know what's down there," the Duke warns, his voice filled with caution. "Stay close, stay quiet. And whatever you do, don't panic." They descend into the darkness, one by one, flashlights piercing the gloom, hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. The tunnel is narrow, the air damp and musty, the walls lined with cobwebs and the remnants of history. They move slowly, the elderly Navy vet guiding them with his knowledge of signals and navigation, the others clinging to each other, their breaths held, their steps careful and measured. The Skinwalkers' presence still lingers above, their howls and cries a distant, haunting reminder of the terror they have left behind. But the group knows that they are not safe yet, that the night still holds many unknowns. They reach a fork in the tunnel, the path branching into two directions, the choice a sudden and unexpected obstacle. The Duke examines the design plan again, his mind working furiously, the options weighed and considered. "Left," he finally says, his voice filled with conviction. The left path leads to the exit. They continue, the journey filled with twists and turns, the darkness a constant companion, the fear a relentless pursuer. Time loses meaning as they make their way through the hidden passages, the world above a distant memory, the escape a tantalizing goal. And then, finally, after what feels like an eternity, they reach the end of the tunnel, a hidden door leading to the outside world, a return to the night that still holds so much uncertainty. The Duke pushes the door open, the night air cool and fresh, the world outside filled with the sounds of nature, the beauty of the stars, the promise of freedom. But they know that they are not safe yet, that the Skinwalkers are still out there, that the night still hides many dangers. They make their way to the farm, their steps quick and determined, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of the creatures that still hunt them. The farm is dark and quiet, a sanctuary that seems untouched by the horrors of the night. They find shelter in the barn, the doors barricaded, the windows covered, the space filled with the smell of hay and the warmth of safety. "We made it," the police officer says, her voice filled with relief and gratitude. "We're safe." But the Duke knows better. He knows that the night is not over, that the Skinwalkers are still out there, that the terror is not yet vanquished. "We're safe for now," the Duke's eyes narrow as he takes in the horrific sight, the realization sinking in like a cold dagger to his core. The leader of the Skinwalkers, towering over the rest, eyes gleaming with malevolence and intelligence, seems to pierce through the darkness and into the very soul of the Duke. And among the ranks of the demonic creatures, the unmistakable uniforms of the local police, the betrayal a stark and brutal confirmation of his earlier suspicion. He turns away from the window, his mind reeling, his heart pounding. The barn, once a sanctuary, now feels like a trap, the walls closing in, the fear mounting. The others sense his tension, their eyes filled with questions, their faces etched with concern. What is it? The police officer from Millersville asks, her voice filled with worry. What did you see? The Duke hesitates, the words caught in his throat, the truth a bitter and painful revelation. They're surrounding us, he finally says, his voice steady, his resolve unbreakable. There are hundreds of them. And the local police are with them. They're part of this. A gasp of disbelief, a murmur of terror, the shock and the horror spreading like wildfire. No, the elderly woman whispers, her face pale, her hands trembling. It can't be true. But the Duke knows the truth. He has seen it with his own eyes, he has felt it in his very bones. We need to stay strong, he says, his voice filled with authority and determination. We need to be ready. We need to fight. The others look at him, their eyes filled with trust, their spirits lifted by his confidence. We'll get through this. The tension in the room is palpable as the Duke gathers the driver, the Navy vet, the officer, and the stranger. They huddle around the map, their eyes focused on a cluster of abandoned houses, their minds racing, their options dwindling. It probably what remains of the original Little Britain, the Duke says, his voice filled with grim determination. We might find answers in there, maybe a way to keep them at bay, but it's very loose. The others look at him, their eyes wide, their faces filled with fear and uncertainty. How do we get there though? The driver asks, his voice trembling, his hands shaking. Well, there were other turns in the tunnel, the Duke replies, his mind working quickly, his resolve unshaken. But we have no clue where those go. It's better than dying and being eaten, the stranger interjects, his voice filled with desperation, his eyes filled with terror. Along with having our skin used as suits. The room falls silent, the reality of their situation sinking in, the horror of their fate a cold and brutal truth. They look at each other, their eyes filled with determination, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that they must act, that they must fight, that they must survive. They know that the odds are against them, that the enemy is relentless, that the danger is real. But they also know that they have each other, that they have the will to live, that they have the courage to fight. And they know that they must take a chance, that they must take a risk, that they must take a leap of faith. For the alternative is unthinkable, the alternative is unimaginable, the alternative is with a collective nod of understanding and a shared determination, they prepare to embark on the perilous journey. The decision has been made, they will venture into the unknown, navigating through the maze of abandoned houses in what remains of the original Little Britain. It's a gamble, but it's their only chance. Quickly but cautiously, they gather what supplies they can find. Hatchets, pitchforks, and the remaining ammunition for the Glocks are divided among them. The elderly Navy vet takes charge of organizing the signaling equipment, while the police officer from Millerville ensures that everyone knows how to handle the weapons. The Duke surveys the group, his eyes meeting those of the driver, the stranger, and the others. They know the risks, but they also know that staying put is not an option. The house won't hold for much longer, and the relentless assault of the Skinwalkers shows no sign of abating. The leader's out there, the Duke whispers to the others in the huddle. I saw him, and some of them are wearing police uniforms. We're on our own. The reality of their situation becomes even more chilling. Trusting outsiders isn't an option. They must rely on each other and their own resources. As the howls and cries of the Skinwalkers grow closer, they take one last look at the map. The path is unclear, the destination uncertain, but their resolve is unbreakable. We go now, the Duke commands, his voice firm, his gaze steady. Stay together, stay quiet, and stay alert. And whatever you do, don't look back. With those final words, they move out, leaving the relative safety of the house and stepping into the dark unknown. The tunnel looms ahead, its twists and turns a mystery, its shadows a haunting reminder of the danger that lurks within damp earth and decay. The Duke's ability to see in the dark is their only guide as they press forward, inching their way through the maze. Every sound is amplified, and the echoes of their own footsteps are a constant reminder of the peril they are in. Time loses all meaning in the oppressive darkness. Hours stretch into what feels like days as they move deeper into the labyrinth, their bodies aching, their minds fraught with tension. But they do not falter. They do not hesitate. They keep moving, driven by the unyielding resolve to survive, to escape, to win. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, they emerge into the cold night air. A hidden hatch creaks open, and they find themselves in the center of a group of abandoned houses. The Duke's eyes adjust quickly to the dim moonlight, and he surveys their surroundings. The village, if it can be called that, is a sad and desolate place. The buildings are crumbling, the windows are shattered, and the once vibrant community has been reduced to a ghost town. The silence is deafening, and the sense of emptiness is overwhelming. But they are not alone. The shadows move, the wind whispers, and the very air seems to hum with an unnatural energy. The place is alive, but not with life. It's alive with something else, something dark and malevolent, something that watches and waits. They stand together in the center of the town, their breath visible in the chill night air, their hearts pounding in their chests. The police officer from Millerville scans the area, her hand resting on the grip of her Glock. The stranger, his face pale but determined, clutches a hatchet. The Navy vet, though weary, stands tall and resolute, his experience and wisdom evident in his steady gaze. The driver, his face lined with exhaustion but his eyes filled with determination, turns to the Duke. "What now?" he asks, his voice barely above a whisper. The Duke takes a deep breath, his mind racing, his instincts on high alert. This place is not what it seems. It's a trap, a snare, a lure. The Skinwalkers are not their only enemy. There is something else here, something more dangerous, something more deadly. He looks at his companions, at their tired but determined faces, at their unwavering commitment to survive, and he knows that they must keep moving. They must find answers. They must find a way to fight back. They must find a way to win. The urgency in the Duke's voice resonates with everyone. His conviction is clear, and his determination is unshakable. Killing the leader of the Skinwalkers is not just a tactical move, it's a personal mission. The police officer's affirmation, coupled with the wisdom shared by the Navy vet, only cements the resolve within the group. They know what they have to do. They must act quickly, decisively, and strategically. The Duke takes command, his eyes darting from one face to another, ensuring that everyone understands the plan. The group of abandoned houses will serve as their temporary fortress, a place to fortify and prepare for the battle that lies ahead. "We're going to take them down," he says, his voice filled with conviction. "We're going to kill their leader, and we're going to make them pay for what they've done. But we have to be smart. We have to be careful. And we have to be ready." The others nod, their faces set in determination, their bodies poised for action. The Navy vet takes charge of the barricading process, directing the others with military precision. Doors are reinforced, windows are boarded up, and traps are set. They work quickly but carefully, knowing that time is of the essence, but that mistakes could be fatal. The police officer from Millerville takes stock of their weapons and ammunition, ensuring that everyone is armed and ready. Her experience and training are evident in her calm and methodical approach, and her presence lends a sense of confidence to the group. The stranger, the driver, and the others fall into their assigned roles, each one contributing to the collective effort. They work with purpose and focus, their minds centered on the task at hand, their hearts filled with the desire to succeed. And all the while, the Duke watches and waits, his mind working, his senses on high alert. He knows that the battle is coming, that the enemy is out there, that the danger is real. But he also knows that they are ready, that they are strong, and that they will win. The tension in the air could be cut with a knife as the Duke and the leader of the Skinwalkers lock eyes, their gazes filled with mutual contempt and defiance. The night is still, the abandoned town holding its breath as if waiting for the confrontation to ignite into violence. The leader of the Skinwalkers, a tall, imposing figure with a face that seems to shift and change, sneers at the Duke. His voice is a guttural growl, filled with menace and arrogance. "You think you can come here, to our territory, and dictate what we do? You think you can challenge us, challenge me, and survive?" The Duke's response is cold, unyielding. His hand rests on the handle of his .44 Magnum, his body poised, his eyes unblinking. "I didn't choose this fight. You did. And now you will face the consequences. You could have left the people alone. You could have stayed away from me. But you didn't. And now you will pay the price." The leader's laughter is a chilling sound, a sound that echoes through the empty streets, a sound that sends shivers down the spine. You think you can defeat us? You think you can kill me? You are nothing, Vanduke. Nothing but a nuisance. An annoyance. A flea that needs to be crushed. The Duke's face remains impassive, his voice steady. We'll see about that. I've faced creatures like you before. I've beaten them. I've killed them. And I'll do it again. You made a mistake when you attacked that bus. You made a mistake when you challenged me. And now you will pay for that mistake. The leader's eyes narrow, his face twisting into a mask of rage. You will die here, Vanduke. You will die screaming. You will die begging for mercy. You will die knowing that you were nothing, that you meant nothing, that you were a failure. The Duke's reply is a soft, deadly whisper, a whisper that carries the weight of conviction, the weight of determination, the weight of inevitability. No. You will die. You will die knowing that you were beaten. You will die knowing that you were bested. You will die knowing that you were defeated. You will die knowing that you were wrong. The silence that follows is complete, absolute, a silence that resonates with the finality of a pronouncement, a silence that echoes with the certainty of a verdict, a silence that reverberates with the clarity of a judgment. And then, without warning, the silence is shattered. The battle begins. The Duke moves first, his .44 Magnum roaring to life, the bullets flying with deadly accuracy. The leader of the Skinwalkers lunges forward, his body contorting, his shape shifting, his form changing. The other Skinwalkers join the fray, their cries filling the air, their movements a blur of speed and ferocity. The clash is a whirlwind of violence, a maelstrom of chaos, a tempest of fury. The Duke fights with a relentless intensity, his skill and experience evident in every move, every shot, every strike. The leader of the Skinwalkers fights with a savage ferocity, his power and strength evident in every attack, every assault, every onslaught. The battle rages on, the town a battleground, the night a witness, the moon a spectator. The sound of gunfire, the clash of bodies, the cries of pain, the shouts of triumph, the screams of defeat, all combine to create a symphony of destruction, a symphony of death, a symphony of horror. And through it all, the Duke and the leader of the Skinwalkers continue to fight, continue to battle, continue to struggle. They are locked in a duel to the death, a duel that will determine the fate of the town, the fate of the people, the fate of the night. The stakes are high, the risks are great, the danger is real. As the Duke and the leader of the Skinwalkers remain locked in their intense duel, the situation outside the abandoned houses intensifies. The group of survivors, armed with makeshift weapons like hatchets, pitchforks, and anything else they could find, burst out of the houses, launching an unexpected assault on the horde of Skinwalkers surrounding the town. The people fight with a desperate ferocity, driven by the instinct to survive, fueled by the need to protect themselves and each other. They've been brought together by a horrifying ordeal, united by a common enemy, and now they fight as one, a team, a family, a force to be reckoned with. Among them, the Navy vet displays remarkable leadership, organizing the group, directing their movements, guiding their efforts. The police officer fights with a disciplined focus, his training evident in his every move. The driver, once uncertain and frightened, now fights with a newfound courage, inspired by the Duke's determination. The stranger, enigmatic and silent, moves with an almost supernatural grace, his every strike precise and lethal. As they battle the horde, the air is filled with the sounds of conflict, the clash of weapons, the cries of pain, the shouts of encouragement, the screams of terror. The night is lit by the flashes of gunfire, the glows of burning torches, the flickers of candlelight. The ground is stained with the marks of battle, the signs of struggle, the evidence of violence. But through it all, the group fights on, holding their ground, pushing back the Skinwalkers, driving them away. They fight with a relentless determination, a stubborn resilience, a tenacious persistence. They fight with a collective will, a shared purpose, a unified goal. They fight with a common bond, a mutual trust, a joint effort. And they fight with a belief, a faith, a conviction that they can win, that they will win, that they must win. Meanwhile, the battle between the Duke and the leader of the Skinwalkers continues to rage, a clash of titans, a confrontation of epic proportions. They fight with an intensity that defies description, a ferocity that defies comprehension, a violence that defies imagination. The Duke fights with the skill of a seasoned warrior, his movements fluid and controlled, his strikes powerful and accurate. He fights with the wisdom of experience, the intelligence of strategy, the artistry of technique. He fights with the grace of a master, the finesse of a champion, the elegance of a victor. The leader of the Skinwalkers fights with the savagery of a beast, his attacks wild and unpredictable, his lunges ferocious and relentless. He fights with the brutality of a monster, the cruelty of a demon, the ruthlessness of a villain. He fights with the malice of an enemy, the wickedness of an adversary, the inhumanity of a fiend. They fight, and they fight, and they fight, neither giving an inch, neither yielding a foot, neither conceding a yard. They fight, and they fight, and they fight, each pushing the other, each testing the other, each challenging the other. They fight, and they fight, and they fight, each striving to gain the upper hand, each struggling to gain the advantage, each striving to gain the edge. They fight, and they fight, and they fight, their battle a symphony of skill and strength, a ballet of bravery and brilliance, a dance of daring and determination. They fight, and they fight, and they fight, their duel a testament to their resolve, a tribute to their courage, a tribute to their valor. They fight, and they fight, and they fight, and as they do, the people around them continue to battle the horde, continue to hold the line, continue to stand strong. With a cry of triumph, the Duke delivers the final, fatal blow to the leader of the Skinwalkers. The creature's eyes widen in shock and disbelief, a low growl escaping its lips as it falls to the ground, defeated and lifeless. The leader's demise sends a shockwave through the remaining Skinwalkers, their connection to their leader severed, their unity shattered. The humans seize the opportunity, pressing their advantage, driving the Skinwalkers back, forcing them to retreat. The creatures flee into the darkness, their once proud horde now scattered and broken, their once fierce warriors now cowed and defeated. The survivors watch as their enemies disappear into the night, their faces lit with the glow of victory, their hearts filled with the joy of triumph, their souls lifted by the relief of survival. They have won. They have survived. They have lived to see another day. The Duke lowers his weapon, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the leader fell, his mind still reeling from the intensity of the battle, his body still trembling from the adrenaline of the fight. He turns to the others, his gaze meeting theirs, his expression mirroring their own, a mix of elation and exhaustion, satisfaction and sorrow, pride and pain. They have won, but at a cost. They have survived, but not without loss. They have triumphed, but not without sacrifice. They have beaten the enemy, but not without struggle. They have conquered the foe, but not without suffering. They gather together, their faces marked by the scars of battle, their bodies bearing the wounds of war, their spirits carrying the memories of conflict. They embrace each other, their hugs filled with the warmth of friendship, the comfort of camaraderie, the strength of solidarity. They have fought together, and they have won together. They have faced the darkness, and they have emerged into the light. They have stared down the horror, and they have come out the other side. They have conquered their fear, and they have reclaimed their humanity. And so the tale comes to a close, a dark and twisting journey through the depths of fear, chaos, and horror. A story of strength, resilience, and the indomitable spirit of humanity. A tale of triumph against overwhelming odds, of victory against a terrifying enemy, of survival in the face of unspeakable terror. The survivors have faced the worst that the world could throw at them, and they have come out on top. They have battled the darkness, and they have emerged into the light. They have fought the evil, and they have won. They will carry the scars of this battle with them, but they will also carry the pride of victory, the satisfaction of success, the joy of life. For they are the survivors.